All right, Prof. I think, the situation is clearly spelt out. We're an economy that is struggling. We are in a worse situation than we were when we went to the IMF. However, the president says we won't extend the program. We're going to just be better at collecting taxes, be wiser at spending, and manage our debts better. Looking at the big picture, is that enough?
Interesting. I want to believe that probably the president didn't want to jump the gun. The idea of taking a critical look at the program and with the possibility of extending should not be off the table. In a certain sense, I also agree with the president that the program needs to be looked at again. And I agree with the president when he mentioned the fiscal consolidation measures. Essentially here we are talking about taxes. If you look at the original program, the fiscal consolidation measures were predicated heavily on revenue enhancements, contributing at least more than almost 60% of the fiscal adjustments compared to expenditure cuts. Then, because we didn't have the time, I agree with the president that all that we had to do was just to introduce more tax handles and also deepening some of the existing tax handles. And of course, the results have not been that good in terms of its impact on taxpayers. But if you look at the revenue numbers and you look at the first structural reform under the IMF supported program, which occasioned the development of the medium-term revenue strategy, you can see that we are ahead of ourselves in terms of the target we set under the medium-term revenue strategy. We had agreed with the IMF as well that we're going to do revenue to GDP ratio of about 18.7% by 2027. If you look at the numbers that are coming in, it looks like probably by the end of 2025, we could be reaching that. So it means that 2 years ahead of that target, we are meeting that. In fact, if you look at 2024, it is possible that by the time we are done, we could be reaching revenue to GDP ratio of about 17.1% or so. Then it means that we just need about 1% or so of GDP to meet that target. Now, if you look at the interesting thing which the president also highlighted, if you look at a country like Ghana, to the extent that our economy is not largely taxable, because we are not growing a taxable economy in order to generate sufficient tax revenue from that economy. And we should bear in mind that it is not every aspect of GDP and its redistribution that is taxable. So the conventional idea of benchmarking your tax revenue by the size of your economy may not be totally relevant for the nature of our economies and all of that, compared to advanced economies, right, where they have spent time over several decades to grow a taxable economy. We are not growing a taxable economy. In fact, if you look at the data, just around 41% of the GDP contributes about 86% of the tax revenue, right? So a large chunk of our economy is not taxable. Okay, the bigger percentage of our economy is contributing just about 14% of tax revenue. So that means that any strategy to collect more tax revenue, if we are not careful, we'll be burdening the faithful few, and by the time you realize you have actually killed the chicken that hatches that gives the egg, right? And all of that. So you may, and actually, if you look at it carefully, you will see that what we have done under this IMF supported program largely is to some extent compromise our medium to long-term survivability for short-term praise. Because the program is short-term in nature. So the IMF comes in, introduce all kinds of measures, right? Fiscal consolidation, the burden of adjustment disproportionately distributed, right? And then this time around, we're also doing debt treatment. And if you look at the relief from the debt restructuring, more than 90% of the fiscal release from the domestic debt restructuring, the external debt restructuring would all be utilized while the IMF program is in place. And this is designed to give the program maximum space to be able to deliver on its objectives. Then the IMF will take the credit. The situation was that bad. We moved in and we got the result. But the question is the post-IMF program, how sustainable will this program be? There's a possibility of rollback of some of those measures. Okay. Those are the things that we want to look at. So if you look at
Prof,
what I was talking about.
Yes, quick one. So you talked about the president not wanting to jump the gun. And I know you're a man with information when it comes to these things. The IMF has been in town, there have been discussions. Do you get the impression that we're probably seriously considering an extension of the program?
My considered view is that it is not off the table. I know to some extent, of course I could be wrong, in academia, we know in part and we prophesy in part.
Sure.
To some extent, the fund will be comfortable with, let's renegotiate the program. That may convey a certain defeatist position that the program didn't work. Unlike the 16th IMF supported program that kicked in from April 3rd, 2015 to April 2019, when it was supposed to have ended in April 2018. By the time we're done with the 2016 election, essentially the program was off, right, in terms of the program targets. Because the election and all of that, the progress that we made in the first year of the program implementation were practically reversed during the election year. Of course, so to bring the program back, then we needed to also extend the time period. But there was something also that the government did at that time. This was a government that had won a comprehensive mandate from the people of Ghana with a manifesto that was, heavy on promises. Remember, free senior high school, 1D, 1F, 1 village, 1 dam, and all of that, right? So under that existing program, there was no way the government would be able to situate all these programs or interventions within that, right? So government took advantage of that. So I want to believe that, and I think that the government should look at exploring this because, look, to think about it, that given where we are, that we are exiting the program in May 2026, conveys considerable risk to the market.
How?
And yes, because you see, when people are investing, they want stability for long. We all prefer relative stability, predictability, not for 1 year, not for 2 years. Otherwise, people who would want to invest in them wouldn't want to commit to long-term investment. They probably would want to lend short so that they can benefit from the repricing, right? And so those are the things that I think we should be looking at addressing before we even get to May 2026, so that we are able to guide investment and anchor in a long-term investment in our economy. That's what we need to do.
Are you suggesting that it will be unwise to exit the IMF program in 2026?
What that will mean is that we have to then start another program.
With the IMF?
With the IMF. Look,
Why?
If you look at the original program, the program was designed with an extension or immediate or a successor right after. Remember that we are not able to go to the international capital market per the original program until 2027. Recently, the World Bank was advising us not to rush and go to the market. That's just consistent with empirics, because once you restructure your debt with the manner that ours took, you are looking at probably 3 to 4 years before the market will receive you favorably. Not to talk about the fact that other neighboring countries like Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, Kenya, and others have gone to the market in 2024. And even if you look at the rate at which they borrowed, it was we will say it was low, but if you look at it in dollar terms, it's still very high. So for Ghana, we could be paying through our nose if we had to go to the market immediately. I think the priority will be how do we reopen the medium to the long-term end of the domestic market, right? So we need to look at all of that. And once we are thinking of issuing medium to long-term instruments, then stability for long is very important, right? Beyond that, rising will be helpful in easing the uncertainty from businesses, from investors, and all of that.
Okay.
Can I go back to what I was talking about?
Please go ahead. Yes.
So if you look at the revenue performance, you can say that we are largely on track. In fact, per our own analysis, we could do away with these taxes without compromising the trajectory. And with some additional measures, we could actually close the fiscal gap. The point is that if you look at what we have done in this country, in the last 2.5 years or 3 years, virtually every 6 months, businesses, manufacturing companies, financial institutions have to practically reconfigure their system to be able to be tax compliant. The compliance cost has been quite enormous. The disruption to their business model, manufacturing setup, and all of that is not good for planning. The uncertainty, in fact, the unpredictability in the business environment that our tax regime introduces, clearly we should be able to avoid that. If you look, this is a country that we say we are not collecting enough revenue. Great, but in the last 4 years, in fact, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, GRA has been exceeding their target. I'm sure you are aware of that.
Sure.
Yeah, but Prof,
fact,
there are some who argue that
2024,
the targets are set too low. What do you think of that?
Precisely. We should be looking at the model we use in setting the target. What it also means is that actually, with the right target setting and challenging enough, we could actually collect more tax revenue. The potential is there. Look, it sends a wrong signal to tax-paying populations that the major revenue collecting agency can exceed its target or meet its target 2 months into the end of the year and all of that. Look, 2024, GRA probably would exceed their target by more than 4%. In fact, in 2020, they exceeded their target by almost 10%. That's one level. Beyond that, if you look, there was a time where GRA scaled up significantly when it comes to electronic VAT invoicing. There was a significant uptick in terms of the revenue and the rest of them. Why did we scale back? So if we're able to deploy more digitization in our revenue administration and remove more of those human interface, there's a potential, high potential, that we could actually increase more tax revenue without burdening the faithful. Those are the options we should look at. Now, if you look at VAT, our VAT efficiency is less than 50%. It's less than 50%. So it means that with the existing VAT rate, with more efficiency, administrative reforms and compliance, we could actually collect more than 15% than we're doing now under the VAT. And that one, you don't need to increase the rate. You just need to enforce compliance and more digitization. So if you look at the avenues, and the NEC had equally identified many of these in their manifesto. Look, it will interest you to know that in the last 25 years, Ghana loses between 3 to 5% of our GDP to tax exemptions alone. That runs into billions of dollars. In fact, in 2011, we lost more than $1.2 billion. 2012, look at that. Just recently, how we began this year, there was exemption of about $350 million that the previous government wanted to grant. That didn't work. That's savings for the country. In fact, that $350 million is more than 70% of the fiscal losses by scrubbing these taxes. That's just from the revenue side. So by rationalizing your exemption regime, and some of those exemptions have not been properly targeted, and we have not done the proper fiscal impact analysis from that to see whether we are benefiting optimally from some of those exemptions. So these taxes, let us not look at them that they are losses. These are incentives to businesses and households. This is my rate. And the analysis we are doing, we are not only looking at how we survive today and tomorrow. My fear is that the way we are eroding fiscal space at the household level through these taxes and at the private sector level, if there should be any major crisis, Ghana will not be prepared to respond to that effectively because we will not have that space. Right? We will not have that space. That's something we should bear in mind.
Right.
So overall, if you look at the medium-term revenue strategy, and I think I heard recently a former Minister of Finance also talking about the fact that we could reach that revenue target by the end of 2025. And I agree with that. If you look at the data. So that is clear. We are not even talking, this is just revenue. Then that's not the only thing. Look at the gold value chain. We have spoken on your network about the fiscal losses and trade misinvoicing and smuggling. We are losing more than $2 billion annually in fiscal losses. Both parties have recognized this. So while the NDC in their manifesto was talking about setting up a gold board, the NPP was also talking about reducing the final withholding tax from 3% to 1% to curb smuggling. So this is an area that we can look at. Of course, I agree that some of these tax measures may take a little while before they bear fruit, while the scrapping of these taxes will have immediate impact. But I do not expect that the lag will be that long because the government has majority in parliament. So unlike under the Hand Parliament, where the NPP struggled to get the 2022 and 2023 budget passed on time and all the various tax measures and all of that, I do not expect that a similar challenge would occur under this regime. So there should not be a lot of doubts from that end. So we look at it from that perspective. Then, if you talk about then even along the same revenue administration, if you look at property tax, and I think there's a lot that we can get from that side, so they should focus on that as well. Then corporate income tax. The inefficiency in there is more than 70%. We are not benefiting optimally from the deployment of the corporate income tax. I am happy to some extent, but of course this is Ghana. About the new GRA commissioner, given his expertise and also exposure, especially in some of these accounting firms, understand the legal regime, and they also understand the loopholes and how companies can take advantage of that. I'm sure he will be able to bring to bear the years of advice he's given to multinationals about tax planning and all of that to take advantage of the loopholes. He will be able to bring all of that to bear now, this time around, in favor of the state. So hopefully we should see better results going forward. Then again, you're also looking at maybe personal income tax. The tax-paying population is very, very low. I mean, from estimated labor force of almost 13.4 million people, if you look at the tax-paying population in terms of direct income tax, right, pay is very, very low. I think we should be looking at scaling that up, and that should be a new target for the new commissioner. How do we move it from 2.2 million tax-paying population in terms of direct income tax to, let's say, about 4 or 5 in the next 2-3 years, especially targeting professionals across the legal profession? Remember that this country is a country of lawyers. This is a country that produces more lawyers than medical doctors, right? So we have to make sure that all these professionals are actually filing their tax returns across the various occupational groups, right? So if we're able to do that, I think we should be able to scale up our tax revenue to GDP without burdening the faithful. Then you want to talk about the expenditure side. We have estimated based on
Prof. Before we move on to expenditure, let's stay on revenue. The president's suggestion, in fact, perhaps the only suggestion he made about how they are going to rationalize revenue collection, was that they were going to improve the understanding of our tax handles.
Yeah.
So, some sort of extension of, tax education, public education on taxation. How do you assess this particular strategy? you've already highlighted the big gap, even when it comes to corporate income tax, 70% inefficiency. Lots of people are not paying tax. There's a finance ministry report from, I think, 2020 that says that about 80% of commercial citizens in Ghana do not pay tax on what they earn. So, yeah, big gap. How will education close that gap?
Yeah, I agree with the president. And it's a combination. I'm sure the president knows very well, and he's talking about the fact that it's a combination. So, one, let's simplify the tax system and make it easy to comply with without imposing substantial burden in terms of compliance costs. That is something that we have conceptualized the tax environment as a technical intervention. But it's not everybody who has that technical insight to be able to comply with that. So simplification is very, very important. That will come also with education. But beyond that, and I'm sure the government knows, that tax compliance also increases when the tax-paying population also sees how those tax revenues are utilized effectively and efficiently in the delivery of public service. So if you look at the theory surrounding tax compliance, the fiscal exchange, behavioral, and all of that, you realize that for the taxpayer, they are considering so many other factors beyond just tax education, and then also simplifying the tax system and making them user-friendly. Because it's just about compliance. It will not make sense that the cost of compliance will be that high in businesses and all of that. So I think those are some of the things that, and many of these are actually captured in the NDC's manifesto. So I'm expecting that they will be rolled out progressively, and that the idea also is that reforms should not be introduced disjointly. They should reinforce each other. And sometimes when there's a change in government, we are in a hurry to throw away all that the previous government was doing, just to also bring ourselves in strongly. I think going forward, the government should hasten slowly, review many of those interventions, and then see where the strengths are, where the weaknesses are. How do we build on those strengths, and how do we overcome some of those weaknesses? That's the way to go. And it's not only just in the tax area. Look, let me say that if you look at the economic instruments that the government introduced since 2017, I don't think that all of them should be set aside just because there's a change in government. No. Some of them we can build on them because the state, on behalf of all of us, has made investment and commitment in some of those economic instruments, whether it's 1D, 1F, or planting for food and jobs and the rest of them. So the blanket approach of cancellation, replacement, and all of that, I think overall may not inure to our benefit. Governance is a continuum, right? You take over.
Oh dear, we seem to have lost Prof. Bokpin there, but we are going to reconnect with him and continue this all important conversation. We've talked a lot about revenue. We'll also talk about how government can rationalize its expenditure and how to manage our debt. Godfred Bokpin. We're talking about the economy. The president has indicated an extension of the IMF program is not the plan at the moment. What he does expect is that we will be rationalizing our spending, we will be improving our revenue collection, and we will be better managing our debt. Okay, how practical is all that? Is it enough to bring us out of the hole we are in? Professor Bokpin thinks don't take the extension off the table yet. And he's given some interesting reasons for it. We're now going through the three strategies the president has outlined. We've been talking about improving the revenue collection. And Prof. Bokpin, just before the break, you were wrapping up on that. Maybe I'll give you a minute to do that, and then we'll go on to the revenue.
The expenditure index.
Sorry, the expenditure.
Yes. So there's another important tax handle we have not explored, which is taxation of high net worth individuals.
Right.
We did some work in that area. We estimate that using a high tax threshold of about 80%. Those are a bit technical, but later we can explain that. And with a low tax rate of, let's say, 1% or so, the country could be generating up to $160 million annually from the taxation of high net worth individuals. Of course, this will have to be progressive. So it's another avenue government should look at in making our tax regime more progressive.
Would that not be burdening the already compliant, taxpayers like you warned against?
No. If you look at what we have been doing in this country, we are taxing income in terms of personal income tax. Mm-hmm. But the high net worth individuals actually don't live on salary or wages and all of that. So all over the world, there's a new drive to see how the rich, the super rich, in fact, they may constitute less than 1% of the population, but sometimes they command more than 60% of the entire wealth of the country. So, for instance, Uganda, when they started with this, they were able to bring in more than $5 million. In fact, South Africa, other countries are looking at that. If you look at US, if you look at Australia, if you look at the rest of them, you can see that the rich are contributing a bit more to also ease the burden on the poor. So that's one area. So I think the way we need to go about it is let's have a policy about taxation of high net worth individuals, back that with a strategy, and then restructure the high net worth office. There's a high net worth office at the GRA. They've been doing quite well if you look at the progress they've made in the last 3 years and the rest of them. But I think still the focus is more those at the high income and who probably will be bringing in at the high, upper rate of 35% or so. But right. I think the taxation of high net worth is paying segment of the population that requires a special attention. So that is something that we should be looking at. That may not suggest that immediately we can realize the $100 and something million, but it's going to be progressive. But it's worth that we do that. Then probably one of the things government could also do is that it should be mandatory for all board members of state-owned enterprises to file their tax returns. Mm-hmm. And all board members of public listed companies, we have to do that. Okay, and then we can scale that up across different professional groups, accountants, lawyers, architects, and all of that. So going forward, I think it's something that we are all doing. In fact, some of us are also in the process of filing and preparing and all of that. So we need to make those the progress in those areas. If we're able to do all of this, Kojo, we will be able to reach an appreciable tax to GDP ratio without burdening the faithful few and without burdening businesses unnecessarily. Under the current regime, I think businesses are suffocating. This is a small open economy, but it is possible that one entity may be required to be tax compliant of maybe 6 or so different tax handles in the fiscal year, and the cost of the compliance and all of that. So I think there's conventional wisdom in what the president has said. The NDC manifesto also captured that. So we can make progress. Okay. Before I move to expenditure, let me say this. Kojo, our underdevelopment, and we have data to support that, has more to do with corruption and inefficiency than the fact that we have not generated sufficient tax revenue. And I've said it before. We have taken time to compare Ghana's tax to GDP ratio to Malaysia, Singapore, South Korea, and even China from the late 90s and the rest of them. And you will see a certain drive of efficiency, prudence. How do we achieve more with less input or resources? This is what has brought these countries to where they are now, and not the fact that they burden their citizens and businesses with the kind of taxes we are asking our businesses to go through, and expect them to be profitable and expect them to expand and recruit people That's like asking fish to climb a tree. That won't work. So those are the things. Look, in Africa here, we have some countries that are collecting as much as 24%, 26% of their GDP in the form of taxes. They haven't seen the development. They haven't seen the development. So it is not good enough to conclude. And surprisingly, that is a narrative the IMF has also bought into. That the solution is collect more revenue, scale up domestic revenue mobilization. In a country with low income level as we are, that spends between 42 and 44% of our disposable income practically on food, the rest on transportation, housing. We have very little to save. You check your saving balance this morning as you are in the studio there.
Please, I don't want to be depressed.
I don't say you should tell the public, but you know.
Yeah.
Look, it's a trap. We cannot tax ourselves out of poverty.
Yeah.
A country that does not create the fiscal space for the households to consume and also save, and for businesses to have cash flow on their balance sheet, will not accumulate capital to take advantage of economic opportunities. Right. You cannot.
Prof, let's talk about expenditure. Even at the beginning, when the domestic debt exchange program was being contemplated, there were so many suggestions to government that cut your expenditure rather, and recover money that way. At the time, the discussion ended with a stalemate. The suggestion being that where do we cut? So here we are again. New government has taken over. Naturally, it costs money to install a new government. There's no avoiding it. Even if you take the budget for repainting offices alone, before you come to all the new vehicles and all the buildings and all the it costs money. Even with the best intentions, money must be spent. Where do we cut?
Okay, so the state is not run on cost. The state has to spend. But the manner, the efficiency with which the state delivers public service matters to taxpayers and matters for growth. I'll give you an example. In the last 15 years, if you compare our expenditure to GDP, that's another layer. Apart from tax revenue to GDP, then the other important thing is your expenditure to GDP. In fact, actually, in economics, it is spending that stimulates growth. And it's not just nominal spending. Actually, it's the efficiency of the spending that stimulates growth. So if you compare Ghana's expenditure to GDP ratio to the Sub-Saharan African average, and you even compare that to Malaysia, Singapore, and the rest of them, even though you will see that our tax to GDP ratio lies below some of these countries and even the Sub-Saharan average, it has not constrained us from spending the way we want to spend. So what it means, and the reason is that the gap between the tax to GDP ratio and then the expenditure to GDP ratio is explained through borrowing, and all of that comes down to spending. So we have spent, relative to the size of our economy, like some of these countries have spent. They picked growth, they picked quality infrastructure, they picked sustainability, and we picked inflation, and picked corruption, and picked destruction of our environment. So we have spent just as many of them have spent relative to the size of the economy, but we didn't get the growth they got. We didn't get the quality of the growth they got. Look, between 2013 and 2015, in the run-up to the 2016 election, the NDC government campaigned on the fact that they've done infrastructure. Do you remember the Green Book?
Yes.
Where are the roads? We want to use them. Where are they? Oh, then a different government also came and said they've constructed more roads in kilometers, more than any other government. Where are they? We want to use them. Then they didn't publish a Green Book. They developed a website or some link and told us that if you want to see what they have done, go and buy data. Go to some website and see what they have done.
Yeah.
Is that public service delivery? We want to use the roads. If you look at Ghana's performance on rural access index by the World Bank, and you also look at the IMF measure of quality of roads and road expansion through the mean square difference between major cities, you can see that Ghana does not rank in the top 10 in Africa. We don't rank in the top 10. You can check. So where are the roads they said they have built? The quality of it, the durability of it. In this country, sometimes when government tells you they've commissioned a road and you don't hurry up and go and use it, in the next 6 months or so, by the time you get there, it will not be there. Why? So it's not just cutting the size of government. And I think this government has done well because the benchmark is that bad. So compared to the previous government, average number of ministers of about 109 or something. I think the first time Nana was governing with 123 or so.
That's
and
right.
then it came down to 88 or something like that. Even 60 is still quite a number. So we are expecting that going forward, we should be doing less than 40. In fact, the trend across Africa, even in Africa, not to talk about Malaysia, Singapore, China, and the rest of them, is that they are all leaning towards lean government. Benin, they are governing with 24. Cote d'Ivoire, I think, is 31. And the rest of them. Apart from that, then you progressively downsize your state-owned enterprises. And I think one of the things we need to do is to do a mandatory staff audit and link that to job description across our state-owned enterprises, including the central bank, and see whether their fundamentals and business model justifies the staff strength they have accommodated. And each of them should give us a plan in the next 5 to 10 years, the progressivity. All these things manifest explicitly in cost to taxpayers. Some of these state-owned enterprises are taking credit, loans, to subsidize a lunch a day for their workers. And the taxpayer must come and take up the bill. Apart from that, so we've seen some progress, 60 ministers. It could be better than that. Of course, the constitution specifies 19 cabinet ministers. In the wisdom of the law, we could govern with 19. The discretionary that is offered the president of the government has been abused over the years. No wonder. You see, the current president told us when he was campaigning, right? The cabinet retreat, they were spending 5 million Ghana cedis per every cabinet retreat. You heard that, right? I'm sure, I don't want to say this, forgive me. So that's waste. Expenditure. In 2024, if you look at the Appropriation Act 2023, the budgetary allocation to the Office of Government Machinery was a little above 2 billion cedis. So that's waste. That's almost how much e-levy was going to bring in 2024. So the question is, in as much as we want to collect more tax revenue, if we are not prudent and efficient in how we spend them, it will be a zero-sum game, if not a negative-sum game. So I think the emphasis for us in Ghana, and I think the middle class has been the missing middle in our democracy over the years. And this is a message to the middle class. The days where you thought that your comfort zone was preserved and therefore you will not be assertive and the rest, they are over. And if you see the crisis that happened in the last 2.5 years, it was a crisis of the middle class. Because when you look at, of course, core poverty at 2.15 USD at the 2017 purchasing parity terms increased, and as we speak right now, approximately 30% of Ghanaians are extremely poor. But the interesting thing to also look at is that lower middle income poverty and upper middle income poverty have been rising. And that is where a good number of these middle class people, that is where they find themselves with a higher inflation and all of that. It actually dwarfs your purchasing power. So we need to come to the table. Look, in Jamaica, when they were going to do their debt restructuring and the rest of them, in fact, they formed a joint committee to monitor fiscal progress and government spending and all of that. The results have been quite better than what we have here. We didn't do that. Apart from reducing, let's say, ministers, of course, we can also make some ministries. The elephant in the room has to do with how our CAPEX, budgetary allocation to CAPEX, capital expenditure, has been utilized over the years.
Right.
And that is where we need to focus on also going forward.
Well, I mean, there are sorry, Prof. There are some who will argue that the two biggest items government spends on are salaries and interest payments. That if you take everything else that government spends money on, everything else, and you even wipe it off the balance sheet, you just stop spending on them, it will be a drop in the bucket. The big problems are the salaries and the interest payments. Now, you've talked a little bit about salaries and talked about ways to rationalize the wage bill. But in reality, how realistic are such goals? Bearing in mind that whenever new governments come along, even when they sack people, they replace them.
Yeah, so that's why I spoke about a staff audit and a plan. It's very important. But could you? Okay, so this is what we have done. Based on the rationalization in government setup that the current government is doing, we are going to save more than 50 million Ghana cedis. Somebody will say, that's insignificant. Oh, wow. But the state is uncomfortable to let go. When you send 200 Ghana cedis, the state wants to take 1% of the 100 Ghana cedis. Is that not more of a little drop, if there's a way to describe that?
Yeah.
So the point is that you make here a little, you make there a little. Over a long period of time, you will see the results. And it will also generate trust in government and government institutions. And it will help in tax compliance. So that is how we are looking at it. US, we can say a land of affluence. They have a department for efficiency, right?
Yeah.
US is exploring efficiency. They think that it makes no sense for the US to go and borrow and subsidize certain things. They are rolling back. So progressively, across central government, general government, state-owned enterprises, if we all buy into the concept of efficiency, productivity, we will be making progress gradually. We do not expect that in a year or so that will rake in billions of dollars. But when it comes to the inefficiency, my focus is actually about procurement. Let's go there. Between 2012 and 2022, that covers both the NDC and NPP, nearly 85% of all government big ticket procurement did not go through competitive tendering. I'm sure you are aware. And a good number of them actually did not come along with explanation consistent with the law, the Public Procurement Act as amended, and the regulation. A good number of them, in fact, the 85%, they were done through restricted or sole source. How do you explore efficiency from that? So when you read the IMF supported program, you will see that there are structural benchmarks and indicative targets linked to public procurement. Look, there is an intricate link between public procurement inefficiency and public debt accumulation. So that is what you see happening. If you check in the last 15 years, project overvaluation and cost overrun, some of them is more than 100%. I'm sure you are aware.
Yeah.
And what is the level of quality out there and the sustainability? There are some urban roads in this country, it's like every year they have to work on them. Every year, every 2 years. What are we doing? We are constructing a flyover and spending as though we are connecting the earth to heaven. These are inefficiencies. We are using the law, the system, to accommodate inefficiency. That is why we've done infrastructure. And government will say they've spent so much on infrastructure. But they are standing alone. The only way infrastructure can connect with systems and other things to improve growth and ensure greater economic transformation and inclusive productivity growth is through efficiency. That is also important. For instance, this government, may not be able to deliver on its big infrastructure push because you don't have the fiscal space. What we need to do is to have a legal institutional framework that allows public-private partnership in the delivery of critical economic infrastructure. Let's take those critical economic infrastructure that could pay for themselves off government balance sheet, de-risk the government balance sheet. Let that be on the private sector balance sheet. In this country, pensions, tier 2 and the rest of them are exploring offshore investment. They want changes to the law so that they can invest offshore and all of that. At the same time, a country that is saddled with huge infrastructure deficits and is looking for funding, is this not marriage made for each other?
Yeah.
In any case, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal is doing it, and the rest of it. So, certain critical infrastructure, and all of this happens when there's trust.
Yeah.
Trust in government and government institutions has gone down significantly. Look, in the run-up to the 2024 election, if the president had told me, or told people to maybe look up, they probably look down in their own interest. We don't trust leadership.
Okay.
So we need to do all of these things to save our democracy from itself.
I mean,
So
Prof,
there is considerable room.
yes,
when
but
it
Prof,
comes to
you
efficiency.
yes,
Yeah.
Prof, you make these points, but I think that the other question will be, how do we, or how can the government marry the fiscal and economic aspirations with political realities in the country?
Should that be a hard choice?
Tell me.
Maybe not. Let's go back to the definition of democracy. If democracy starts with the people and ends with the people, then aligning this will not be a problem. Aligning this will not be a
The
problem.
people are
And
making
I think-
demands all the time, Prof. They're making demands. They're telling you, we need this, we need that. Every time they're making demands. You see that ahead of you is an election, and if you're President Mahama, who is not contesting the next election, your party expects you to make the grounds fertile for them.
Yeah, all these things are happening because we have allowed it. The missing middle class, we have allowed it. We've allowed tribal differences, political differences to come our way. We are majoring on the minor, and therefore the politicians are getting away with it. I think that is what we have done in the last couple of years. And I think as professionals, as academics, and all of that, I think we need to sit back and evaluate our position, our public pronouncements, and interventions that we make, whether it's driven by the common good or from a tribal political point of view or whatever. Because other than that, the net winners from this will be the politicians and their financiers.
Right.
That is how I see it. And I think that, and in this country, we've made some good progress because some people said no to certain proposals. You remember Parliament was going to build a new chamber.
Yes.
Some group of people said drop the chamber. And since they dropped it, they've not picked it up.
All right. Prof,
So
let's
there are a number, look, in the advanced countries, Kojo, let me say this. In the advanced countries, the development we see and we so desire, people fought for it on the street for days, for weeks. We are not talking about the French Revolution. We are not talking about the US. We are not talking about UK and the rest of. So development will not come just like that. And no Ghanaian should sit anywhere thinking that the politician is actually thinking about them. No. We have to write some kind of incentive mechanism to them. And if they think that they cannot work under those conditions, they should resign. That's all.
Right. We're talking to Professor Godfred Bokpin, assessing the president's plan to ensure we don't extend the IMF program. He says better revenue collection, wiser spending, and better management of our debts. That and all our other debt obligations.
Yes. So to some extent, yes. You know, when you mention sinking fund, immediately Tekbe's name comes to mind. Right. There were some interventions that the NDC started in the run-up to the 2016 election that I believe the NPP government should have sustained, and in terms of prudent debt management and all of that. But again, bear also in mind that sinking fund has opportunity cost and all of that. All over the world, sovereigns actually don't pay their debt. They just roll them over. Roll over. Then you manage the rollover risk. So I am thinking that with credible leadership, and here the government will have to be mindful, the team they are putting together, that it will send signal credibility to the market. If we are able to reopen the medium to the long-term end of the market in terms of bonds, typically we'll be able to roll this over probably at a lower rate as we try to also bring our interest rate down. But if you look at the projection from now to 2027, I do not see much risk. Of course, in terms of the bullet classroom, 2027, 2028, and the rest is something that we should be mindful of. And by then also we will not be under the IMF supported program if we hadn't extended it or we didn't go for another program. So those are the things. So there are considerable risk headwinds. And I believe that the government is fully aware. The tax cuts, the immediate impact will be felt also through our liquidity indicators because that won't be available. But actually, it will not compromise the outlook from now to 2027 if you look at the debt sustainability threshold and where we are now. And if the government's additional tax measures begin to bear fruit and then block the leakages in the revenue envelope and also curtail significantly smuggling in the gold value chain, and we're able to ensure that and then the other thing I didn't talk about was to take another look at the fiscal regime in the mining sector. I think government should look at that so that we're able to benefit optimally from the natural resources that God has given us. Of course, data exists to suggest that in Africa, countries that are naturally endowed actually don't utilize that well for the good of the people. That's the data. If you look at the GDP per capita for resource-rich and non-resource-rich countries in Southern Africa, the difference is clear. But we should be starting a new course. Oh, Kodo, do you remember? Let me say this before maybe we end. When Ghana discovered oil in commercial quantities, there was a discussion about avoiding the oil curse, the natural resource curse, whatever. The discussion was whether we should go the way of Norway or the way of Nigeria. They all started to end. We ended with our neighbors, Nigeria. That's what we've done. Governance of our resources, natural resources. And to even make it worse, the abuse with irresponsible mining and the smuggling. Oh, the ultimate beneficiaries, the United Arab Emirates and the rest of them. Right? This is not an accusation. This is data. If you check from Bank of Ghana, United Arab Emirates is now our major export destination country and is driven largely by gold. And in fact, 85% of all the gold to United Arab Emirates were smuggled out of Africa. The Swiss study indicated that between 2012, I think, and then 2022, over 11-year period, $115.3 billion worth of gold was smuggled out of Africa. And 3 countries contributed to this significantly: Ghana, Mali, Zimbabwe.
Wow.
If you look at all these things together, Ghana is one of the countries in Africa where water only flows upwards. If you are down there, you will not get some. Beyond that, there is the risk with our growth is that our growth has also come along with upward redistribution of wealth. And that is why inequality is widening. The gap between the haves and the have-nots keeps widening. And today, people in private sector, people in businesses feel that the only way they can reach that convergence point is to get involved in that politics. And that is how they can get their fair share. So people are actually trading off their businesses for politics and using their businesses to support politics. People are using their offices to support politics. That is not for national development because of what we can get, because that's the only means. Somebody joins politics, maximum 4 years. Wasisan Imoja in lifestyle, maybe for life. So if you are in the private sector working so hard, it may take you like probably 20 years or so to have a quarter of the lifestyle somebody gets by getting into politics in 6 months or in a year. This kind of distortions in the system is not good for social cohesion. It's not good for nation building. So I think that if we leave it to politicians alone, they will not deliver the results we want. We must look at the data, we must be driven by the data, and we must say it the way it is.
What about oral, Prof? How much of that can we rely on to help improve the color of our books?
Yeah, that's a very important question. In the analysis we considered oral. In our estimation, I don't think that we can recover more than 10% of that amount.
That's still a lot of money.
Yeah, that's still a lot of money. I mean, that's still a lot of money.
That's about $2 billion.
Yeah, and that's several times the losses we are going to get, if we even call it losses, from these tax cuts or scrapping or whatever. Okay, so in fact, there are low-hanging fruits that this country can make money. Oh, okay. Do you know that the IEA, they did some work and said that this country will lose as much as we collect by way of taxes. The leakages in our revenue envelope, and these leakages, they don't add to the CEO, straight to people's pockets. And that is why in the public sector, or sometimes you see people from their regular salary. Look, in economics, if you show me your pay slip, I can predict your neighborhood. You know housing prices. Yeah. I can predict your lifestyle. If it's different from that, the system is giving you something other than what is coming from the regular predictable and all of that. But of course, people can develop other alternative incomes and stuff like that. But I think we need to look at the distortions. If you look at our salary, and here, let me commend the government statistician. He's done a great job. If you look at the data in the last couple of years that the Ghana Statistical Service has been sending out, quality data, quarterly basis. If you look at our inflation, if you look at so data exists to help us plan better so that our development or our interventions reflect the 5 Ps, which is dominating the development discussion now. What are the 5 Ps? That development at the sovereign or at the country level must be people focused, must preserve our planet Earth, it must preserve peace, reflect partnership and prosperity. Is the reason why countries are looking beyond GDP. In any case, you know how some people call GDP, right? They actually don't call it gross domestic product, but they call it gross domestic problem. Because by design, GDP was not designed to improve the welfare of people. It was designed in response to the war and military might and all of that. Of course, we have found a way of restructuring it to make it a bit people focused, but that has not happened.
Right.
And to the extent that the destructive aspect of GDP is poorly or not reflected in GDP, warrants a discussion beyond just wholesale goods. And that is why in Ghana, you check the first 2-3 quarters of 2024, gold has been driving the growth. But that has come along with great distraction to our environment and ecosystem.
Yeah.
That is not captured. That is not captured. Yeah. And I think those are the things that we should be looking at. If you look at the whole outlook and you begin to factor in the risk, and let me say this, the distraction to our environment is not just for environmentalists to worry about. It has implications for fiscal sustainability going forward. So the biggest threat, our fiscal framework, is actually not the debt restructuring. It's the irresponsible mining and the distraction to our ecological system, ecosystem that supports life.
That's an important thought, Prof. I think it's a good.
And I think we need to start that conversation on this irresponsible mining.
Right.
And the government has to give us a clear plan in the next 6 months how they are going to resolve this. And there should be a regular update from the highest office in this country, the progress they are making on this. Because you know what? Our perspectives about development and welfare differs from individual to individual. For some people, they put premium on the ecology more than GDP per capita. Others put more premium on river bodies and the rest of them than just their bank balance. Whatever we are doing must reflect that diversity.
Right, right. I want to say a big thank you to you, Professor Bokpin, for spending a big chunk of your morning with us. It's been enlightening, as always, and we appreciate you for that. Professor Indeed. Professor Godfred Bokpin is a professor of finance and economics at the University of